Hey Nate, just wanted to get back with you about some of those questions that you asked me concerning church growing up. Um, I was in Asheville, North Carolina, as you know. That's where I grew up. There were two churches that I frequented. St. Paul Baptist Church was a predominantly black church where my family went. My mom and dad went there. My grandparents went there, and my great grandparents went there. As a matter of fact, my great grandfather's house is still standing next to that church today. The church has been there for about 100 years or so. Strong Baptist roots, very family oriented and community based. And if I didn't mention before, it's predominantly a black church. Only time we had white people come in there, it seemed like they came for funerals and things of that nature. The other church was Merriman Avenue Baptist Church. That was on the other side of town. They had a very strong outreach ministry in which they had buses resources like that to go out and bring other people in. So as opposed to St. Paul, where it was very community based, this wasn't so much. Although a lot of community folks went there, this large bus ministry kind of gave it a little bit of color. So the church was well established. There were probably more than 500 people there. And again, very well established, very well supported. Diversity, as I pretty much already said, Merriman Avenue Baptist Church was predominantly white, but the bus ministry uh, gave it some color. But St. Paul didn't have a bus ministry, and it was predominantly black. The sermons were pretty long at St. Paul. You could expect that a sermon would last at least about an hour or so. Um, and that sermon was more preaching than teaching. Of course, it was scripture based. They always read some scriptures before they started as a pretext for the sermon, but they preached it, and people would be very vocal and very involved. They would sometimes jump up and down and shout, as we called it, but it was very interactive. Whereas at Merriman Avenue Baptist Church, people were a little bit more subdued. You didn't find a lot of people responding vocally to what they heard. It was more of a teaching environment. But nevertheless, they always started with Scripture, and their sermons were Scripture-based. And for them, they would probably go a little less than an hour, as opposed to St. Paul, when you could expect maybe an hour or more. The structure of the service. At St. Paul, we had Sunday school start at about 9:30. The prayer service will start at 11 and last about 30 minutes. The Sunday service will start at about 11:30, and church wouldn't usually get out until about 1 p.m. Sunday evening, they had church at 6 p.m., and during the week, they had a Wednesday night Bible study at 7. It would last about an hour. At Merriman Avenue, it was kind of the same. Sunday school started at 10. Worship service started at about 11. There was Sunday night service at 6 p.m., and they had a midweek service on Wednesday, but I never went to that. And you could expect for them to get out at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock as well. So the difference between the churches, I kind of already told you. Merriman Avenue was predominantly white, whereas St. Paul was predominantly black. We already talked about the sermon styles. One was more preaching, the other was a little bit more teaching. The worship service were very similar in that they used hymnals to do songs with. They both did Bible studies, and of course Merriman Avenue had more resources, so their outreach focus was a little bit better. Um, in praise and worship, very similar. Again, they had an organ and a piano at both of those churches, and it wasn't bad. So as opposed to the churches that we frequent today, more full gospel type churches, neither of the churches that I grew up in are like those churches today. The churches today that we frequent, again, full gospel. They teach the whole Bible, not just things that they didn't necessarily understand, like in the churches that I went to growing up. But they teach all of it. That's why we call it full gospel. The praise and worship was a little bit different today. They use a wide range of instruments. I mean, you name it, you probably see it. Drums, bass, keyboard, guitar, the piano, stringed instruments, brass instruments, you name it. The worship is very contemporary today, and that's the kind of stuff that touches your heart, which elicits a response. Versus some of the churches when I was growing up, People just kind of just sat there and they enjoyed what was being sang, but they weren't very interactive. And the worship today is very interactive. It's the same thing with the sermons today. Those full gospel churches that we frequent, they taught the word, and they get very detailed in the teaching of the word to make sure that the congregation understood everything that was being taught, so you could apply it. So, the churches that I attended 30 years ago certainly aren't the churches that you and I grew up with and go to today. So, anyway, I hope that answers most of the questions that you had. And if I didn't cover everything as full as you would have liked, I apologize. But you have a good time, and I hope the class goes well. Talk to you later.